Having completed the front gearbox in the previous kit bag, it's time to move our attention to the rear gearbox with bag D. The rear gearbox pretty much follows the same basic principle as the front, so again you'll need to keep the thread lock and black grease handy for this kit bag. So with that, let's crack on. As with the front gearbox, we begin with the main gearbox housing and insert a bearing to the outside and another on the inside, both being the same size this time, before pushing the pinion gear through from inside out and placing a small shim on the outer side. We have the rear universal drive shaft here, complete with the differential coupler attached, which can now seat over the pinion body, lining the set screw up with the flat portion of the pinion gear, and lock into place using the set screw, with a little thread lock thrown in of course, making sure it's nice and tight. Now insert the rear differential constructed in bag B into place. Remember, this is the differential with the 10,000 weight oil. With it in place, check the fitment, making sure it's nice and snug, adding the larger shims if needed. Again, in my example, I don't need the shims in place just yet, although as with the front, keep them safe in case they're needed once the vehicle is run and worn in a little. Nevertheless, we can then place the gearbox cover on top and secure into place using two of the 14mm caphead screws supplied within the package. We're screwing into plastic here, so tighten enough so that it's snug, but don't over tighten as you'll risk stripping the threads. At this point, just like we did with the front gearbox, coat the ring gear with a small amount of grease going all the way around. Again, you don't need to go crazy with the grease here either. After which we can slowly turn the universal drive shaft, as well as the differential itself, just to get some of that grease spread around the ring gear and pinion, and to check everything is turning nice and freely. We can then proceed to seal up the gearbox by placing the final plastic cover on the bottom, which is open this time round, and securing into place using the two 6mm flathead screws, again taking care not to over tighten and strip out any threads. Gearbox now complete, although still open from the bottom, so take care with that grease. This will be covered when installing on the chassis later. We now need to grab our rear shock tower. Just like the front, it's carrying a lot of customizability with regards to mounting positions, allowing you to really tweak your driving style. So we'll start with the shock standoffs, inserting into position, third hole down, and holding in place with a 5mm wrench while we tighten into position using a flange lock nut on the opposite side, before repeating with the second standoff. And with that, we're pretty much done with the rear shock tower, and it can now be installed onto the rear gearbox. So with the shock tower lined up into position, use the two remaining 14mm caphead screws to secure the tower into place. Again, we're going into plastic, so be firm but do not over tighten. If you decide to use an electric driver instead, then go slow and stop towards the end in order to use a hand driver for the last tightening up, otherwise you risk stripping the threads. And with that said, our rear gearbox is complete, along with the rear shock tower. Again, everything fits together with perfection, making for a nice tunable setup. With our front and rear gearboxes now complete, it's time to move on to bag E. So join me in the next video where we'll start assembling more of the rear end.